Hello everyone, welcome back once again. And we're in game 3 of the winners show match in Guracord. And as I've hyped up in my previous video, I I'm very impressed with this third game and I think it's the best game in the match. So with that out of the way, let's just get right into it because there are a lot of moves for this game and a lot of moves worth looking at. So let's start off. This time, DootchMann or Mary has the white pieces and Junior Ferraz has the black pieces, and we have a respectable opening here. We have e4, c6, d4, d5, e5, c5. So this is the Carl's board winning Carl's variation of the advanced Carol Khan. So we have covered this opening in many streams in the past before, so I won't be going into too much detail. But essentially, the most critical line is to take d takes c5 and to try and hold on to the pawns. So knight c6 was played. This is one of the main options to try and put pressure onto this e5 pawn. Ideas will be to play e6 and to attack both pawns at the same time, and if black is able to win both pawns, black will be very comfortable. So here a3 was played. Mary knows his theory. He's trying to hold on to one of the pawns. He's trying to hold on to the c5 pawn by playing b4 at some point. So this will be a very strong counter towards the dark square bishop, and he's trying to say that if you capture my pawn on e5, then I will have enough compensation by getting rapid development with bishop b5 check, knight c3, knight f3, and I'm happy with giving up this pawn since I'm up a pawn currently anyway. So here, black makes a mistake based on lack of understanding of the opening. So he plays g6, black plays g6, which is much too slow for the simple fact that um, the opening revolves around giving up an extra tempo in return for trying to put pressure and win these two pawns. So winning both the pawns is very important in order to have a chance of equalizing. And also another fact is that you have already spent time by playing c6, c5, so you don't really have a lot of time to develop too slowly. E6 and putting pressure right away should be the way to go, but instead g6 is a bit too slow because you are spending another pawn move that doesn't directly um, put pressure on anything, and even if you develop your bishop over to g7, you're focusing on the wrong pawn. And oh, sorry about that. Right up, bishop b5 was played to try and punish this fact that g6 was too slow, and now you have little chance of winning either of the pawns. So if white manages to hold on to both of the pawns, white will be significantly better and even possibly winning at grandmaster level. So bishop g7 is played, following through with the plan, but now knight f3 defending the pawn. So now you have no chances of winning this pawn because you don't have a bishop attacking it anymore, and you don't have any chances of winning this pawn because your knight is pinned and it is defended by another knight. So bishop g4 trying to say if you pin my knight to prevent me from winning the pawn, I will pin your knight to prevent you from capturing my pawn, which is very logical. White decides to just castle out of safety and claiming that sure you can now capture my e5 pawn but at the expense of rook to e1. So let's say if here if you play, let's say, bishop takes e5, then white can claim that my king is safe, just like in the first game. Black doesn't have time to castle yet, and white can very quickly try and take advantage of the center by playing moves like rook to e1, playing moves like c4, and rapid development, and soon black will be under pressure. But instead, other common moves that have been played in this position have been e6 by other chess players, simply I guess to solidify the position and try and continue developing with knight to e7. But here in this position, black played Bishop takes f3 instead, so it is as of move 8 that you have a completely new Lee chess game. So queen takes, very logical. And now the idea would seem to be bishop takes e5, but it doesn't work for the same reasons that I mentioned before. White can very quickly take advantage of the center with moves like rook to e1 and c4. So instead, black decides to play e6 to try and develop the knight and get the king to safety. So bishop takes c6 with check, so claiming that if you want to try to develop, I'm going to take my opportunity before you manage to develop your knight and just capture right away. I don't mind giving away the bishop pair because it means that you have a very awkward pawn structure, and it's going to take a lot of time to try and I guess break the opening with f6 or maybe bishop takes and f6. So white will be able to enjoy the space advantage and develop very easily. So here rook to e1 is played, defending the pawn first, maintaining some flexibility for the bishop. Maybe the bishop wants to go here, here, or anywhere to take advantage of the dark squares around the black's position. So knight to e7 was played, developing as planned, maybe coming to f5. b4 was played to solidify this structure, and castles. We have bishop to b2. We are developing this way instead to try and counter the dark square bishop, and so that you can anchor this pawn um, in a more reliable way without hindering any development from your other pieces. So maybe you can develop your knight this way. This is a possible idea, applying pressure onto the weak pawn. And normally if you develop on the other diagonal, maybe you obstruct some of your other pieces, so that's why white decides to develop on b2 instead. A5 is played trying to chip down on the center and take advantage of the fact that white hasn't been developing very quickly. White has been spending time on pawn moves, on very slow developing moves, and perhaps with the opening on the queen side, maybe black can try to generate some sort of counterplay by taking advantage of this discontinuity of the pieces. Like you see, the pieces are very disconnected. They aren't really protecting each other. And if things open up on the queen side, maybe the bishop can prove to be a very useful piece in the long term. So knight to d2 was played. You need to get your pieces developed. You're following through with the plan. A takes b4, a takes b4, and here queen to c7 was played, so applying more pressure onto this pawn over here. But perhaps more accurate would be to take advantage of the weaknesses and opening on the queen side and playing something like rook takes a1. So rook takes a1, bishop takes a1, and you can see that here, after here and queen to c7 here, black can try and take advantage of the a file and gain control of the a file, and perhaps it will be a more testing try. Because if over here, if rook takes a1 here, then queen b8, and here this weak pawn will be more under attack. There isn't an easy way to continue defending the pawn, because the bishop is obstructing the rook from guarding the b pawn, and perhaps this may not be so accurate. So that's why you have to take with the bishop and maintain control over the e pawn. So anyway, here queen to c7 was played in this position, and c4 was played by white in order to sort of hasten development and try and exploit black's weaknesses. So the idea is that if d takes c4 is played, knight takes c4 can be played, and then the knight will be able to jump into these beautiful squares. This diagonal will be opened up from the queen, and the weakness can be exploited even further, perhaps with moves like even knight to a5, for example. So basically, it makes black's weaknesses more accessible. And another idea is that perhaps if there is no e4 push to close things, d4 push to close things up, because the bishop can simply capture. So this here is a critical position, because although this c4 move looks very comfortable. You might be even be threatening to capture here on d5 and create pass pawns maybe. So what was I wanting to say? Idea is to jump in here. So um, this is a critical position where black has to find a way to actually prevent this from happening and to try and gain back some dynamic control over the position, because as you can see here, black's pieces are very passive. Black's pieces here are very passive. There are no comfortable breaks. f6 isn't very feasible right now because you can just take and be better. So black has to try and take advantage of tries to try and improve his position and target these weaknesses and like the lack of coordination between the white pieces. So since this is a critical position, I'll give you a few seconds to try and analyze the position and figure out a way for black to try and gain control of the situation while I have a sip of my water and wonder why I'm tripping over myself so much when I've already analyzed this beforehand. All right. So here the way to actually let me see, where is my, okay. So there are actually a few ways to try and take advantage of this c4 move. Well, as black, you would want to you don't want to play d takes c4, but you want to try and target this weak b pawn over here. So the way you would try and do that is to play a move that I mentioned before, rook takes a1, and because of the weaknesses here on the b pawn and the d pawn, you can't capture with the rook, because if rook takes, then you'll be able to get a very active position very quickly with bishop takes e5, and you don't really want to capture back because then the queen will be centralized. So maybe something like you need to defend your bishop somehow, so maybe queen to a3 here. So you defend the bishop while also maintaining control over the a file, and then you can take here, okay, bishop takes h2, king h1, and something like this would be better for black because now black is up a pawn, and the pieces are much better than before. The king side isn't so threatening anymore, and very soon you might be able to play something like bishop back to e5, trade off the pieces, get your queen into the center, develop your knight, and this looks not too favorable to any side, but it looks easier to play for black. It's much more comfortable compared to the previous position. And therefore, since you can't recapture with the knight, and you can't capture the rook, you have to recapture with the bishop. And that means that you have lost control over the a file. So you can quickly develop your pieces with something like bishop to h6, trying to take advantage of the fact that the knight is undefended. Maybe something like queen to d3, defending and trying to perhaps infiltrate, defend your pawn, defend your knight, trying to keep everything under control. But now, bishop takes d2, queen takes d2, and there are a lot of dynamic possibilities for black in this position. As you can see, there are a lot of arrows that I've drawn, but the basic idea is that this pawn over here serves as a detriment for white because the pawn is sort of dead and it's blocking the bishop from moving, from having any scope. And since the bishop is in the corner, it can't really access any other diagonals. As if it were on b2, then at least it could, like, move to other diagonals, right? But on a1, this is the only diagonal it can take hold of, which doesn't do anything at all thanks to this e5 pawn. And there are ideas like queen b7 here to take advantage of the weak b pawn. Pieces can develop very quickly. Alternatively, you can also try and get control over the a file with moves like rook to a8, rook to queen to a7, and take advantage of the structure there. And overall, you can see that there are lots of positional and dynamic strengths in this position for black, even though white is still up a pawn. So maybe something like this, attacking the a file, attacking the b file, and black has compensation in this position. Let me see. All right, but instead, in the game, rook takes a1 wasn't played. Instead, rook f to b8 was played, trying to take advantage of the trying to attack the b pawn directly. But this doesn't really work because white can simply play rook takes a8, rook takes a8, and now you've lost control over the b5 square and effectively the attack on the weak b pawn. So here white has enough time to slowly gain control over the a file by playing moves like queen to b3, rook to a1, and just say that I'm up a pawn. But instead, white decides to play another fine move as well, c takes d5. So following through with the plan, threatening to play d6, forking the queen and the knight, and also perhaps if c takes d5, then moves like rook a1 can be played, queen d3 can be played, and you have a mobile pass pawn pair. And if you capture with the e pawn, then this isn't too great either because now this is a more pronounced weakness. You can still play queen b3 and play and prepare rook a1. You can defend everything, and then the knight will be able to get in to this stronghold over here, unopposed. So, what was I wanting to say? To say one, c takes d5 was played in the actual game. C takes d5 was played. Um, So knight c4, try to take advantage of this pin over here and comfortably getting the knight into the position. So black recognizes this threat of knight to d6, which is why black played knight f5. This move here is reasonable, I guess. But the issue with this is that knight f5 doesn't actually stop knight to d6, which was played by white, because after knight takes d6, we can play e takes d6 over here. It attacks the queen and unleashes an attack over on the dark square bishop, and we now have three connected pass pawns, which is incredibly strong. So there is no time for bishop takes b2 because you lose the queen. So you are forced to move the queen somewhere, like maybe d7, trying to blockade the pawns, prevent the pawns from pushing forward. And then you can just trade the bishops, king takes, and then just enjoy this position. Maybe move your pieces over to the queen side, and then you can push your three connected pass pawns and just make a new queen. But instead, white makes a slight mistake by taking with the c pawn instead, and this isn't as strong because you only have one pass pawn, right? You have one pass pawn here, you have one easily stopped pass pawn over here, and this pawn is still not doing much and is still hindering your own dark square bishop. So I guess the idea from white here was that perhaps white wanted to further obstruct this dark square bishop, which is why um, he left this complex over here. But objectively is not so accurate because it's harder to convert this position over here. So queen b7 was played, getting out of the way, keeping an eye on this d7 square, putting pressure on this weak pawn. Queen b3 defending everything, and queen b5 preventing this b pawn from being pushed, because if both pawns were pushed then things would get very dicey. So rook a1 was played contesting the a file. Rook b8 piling on onto this weakness. Bishop to c3 defending everything. h5 creating a bit more room for the king, perhaps prevent any back rank issues. Queen to a4 trying to trade pieces because white is up material and white has two pass pawns. So when you have two pass pawns, the lesser pieces on the board left, the better, because then the pawns will be stronger. Queen to c4, avoiding a queen trade while applying pressure onto everything. So queen to a7, saying that if you take my piece, I will take your rook. And here, the ideal way to play would be to play something like rook c8, add even more pressure, defend everything, and try to get counterplay that way. But instead, black here decided to play rook to d8 instead to keep an eye out on this pass pawn over here. But that allowed for a that allowed for queen to c7 in this position, simply saying that if you trade pieces, then I get a dangerous pass pawn, and if you try to decline in any way, there's no way you can really decline a trade because your rook is hanging. So this will be the way to go, but instead white goes for a more aggressive approach by playing queen to e7, attacking the rook this way, and trying to actually directly promote the pawn. And here, this isn't so accurate because of the fact that black can simply just go back and play rook to c8, apply more pressure onto this bishop, and simply meet um, d7 with bishop to f8. So if you take, let's say, d takes c8 queen, you can take here, and this isn't that bad because the queen has to retreat somewhere else onto the here, and you can win back the bishop. So this isn't too bad. This isn't too bad. And if you decide to queen this way instead, you can just take back here, and you can take here, and then this is an even better version. This is still quite equal because even though black is down the exchange, this is still fairly equal because it is hard for white to make progress, and it's hard to queen this pawn because the rook is under attack and there's back rank issues. So queen to e7 is not so accurate, but fortunately for white, black didn't find rook to c8. Instead, rook to f8 was played. It's just a, you know what, I'm just going to put my rook next to my bishop, next to my king. I'm not good, so I don't have to worry about it anymore. And now I'm perfectly prepared to capture the bishop on the bishop on c3 and attack your rook. So here white proceeds with his plan with a d7, trying to make a new queen, but this is actually a blunder and a very critical position. So how should black actually take advantage of this miscalculation and get back on top? Like, white has been in the driver's seat the whole game, up from the right from the middle game, based on these two pass pawns and all of these more active pieces and all these threats. But with this d7 move, it enables black to actually gain an advantage. So I'll give you a few seconds to try and analyze this position and try to make sense of this threat here of d7 and figure out how black can try and take the reins of this game. So this d7 move is a blunder because of reasons that I've already mentioned before. Simply queen takes c3, and now you will realize that there is not enough time to make a new queen because queen takes a1 is checkmate. Queen takes a1 is checkmate. So white has to spend time to protect the rook, and then black will be able to prevent this queen from promoting. So for example, in the game, a rook to d1 was played. Simply, you can't move the rook anywhere else because of back rank issues. So white decides to put the rook on the central square, and yet not too passive because rook to f1 can also be played, but I guess rook to d1 is preventing any threats while also not being too accessible to being attacked. And here queen to c7 is played, so now you can't really attack, you can't really make a new queen, because if you make a new queen, you can just take, and you just lost your pass pawn. And now black is the one up a pole piece, and if this pawn falls, then that will be much better here in this position. So instead, h4 was played, eliminating any back rank issues. Bishop takes e5, free pawn, we take those. G4 was played to open things up and try to generate counterplay on the king side, because now white recognizes that this pawn isn't queening anytime soon, so white has to try and generate some sort of attack on the king side. So bishop d6 was played, threatening the queen, queen g5, lining up with the king. Queen takes d7, so the pawn is lost, and now white has to really try and generate an attack, or else if black can just take the pieces and get the king safe, then there really is no point in continuing this game any further. So g takes h5, trying to open up the g file. Bishop to e7, attacking the queen. Queen to g4, maintaining vision over the king. And then king to g7, so protecting the g pawn. H takes g6, f takes g6, and now h5. So once again, trying to take advantage of the open files, trying to generate as much counterplay as possible, threatening queen to g6 check. So rook to f6 was played, trying to defend this pawn over here. Rook to e1 was played, now putting some pressure onto the center. Queen to a7, piling up over here onto the f2 pawn. So white is forced to defuse the threat by playing not pawn, rook to e3, so obstructing the vision of the queen. And now bishop, not bishop, queen to b6 first, attacking this pawn, applying pressure on this pawn. So now two pieces are attacking that pawn. b5, preventing the pawn from being captured. Bishop to c5, amazing move, piling on maximum pressure, and now there is no way for white to actually hold on anymore. There are no threats, and there are no real threats, and black is white has to give a lot of material or get checkmated. Sorry about that. A large truck just drove by, so that might have been a lot of noise. But basically, there is no way to objectively hold on to this as white, since there are too many attackers and too much pressure onto the white king. The white king is too exposed, and black will be able to win a lot of material or checkmate the king. So white tries rook to f3, trying to continue to um, defend the f2 pawn. And here, what should have been played was rook takes f3, just taking, and just capturing over, and then capturing here. So now, after capturing everything, there are no more threats for white, and black can centralize everything and push these connected pass pawns. So this should be the way to go, but black messes up the move order by playing queen takes b5 first without trading the rooks, and this is a big difference because with an extra piece aiding the queen, there can actually be threats made against the black king. So this is a critical position, and we are arriving into the position in the thumbnail. H6 check was played, so this is the position in the thumbnail, and this is a very critical position, very critical position. So a lot of critical positions in this game. That's why it's so close and so amazing. So try and fully analyze this position and find a way to draw as black. Find a way to draw as black, because you have lost the initiative by taking on b5 first. This heavy pieces here around the black king are a legitimate threat, so you have to find a way to draw this position. All right, the only way to hold on to a draw in this position is to play the very counterintuitive king to h7. Now you might say, what is the point of this king to h7 move? You're giving up an entire rook. Well, the point is, after rook takes f6, queen to b1 check. So king tries to avoid checks by moving to h2. There's bishop to d6 check, king to g2, queen to e4 check, forcing a trade of queens. So after you trade the queens, rook takes, the bishop comes back to attack the h6 pawn, rook takes, king takes, and here in this position, this is actually a dead draw. This is a dead draw. There are no pass pawns. F against one single F against G, both on the same side. Kings are relatively safe, and the bishop is very close by. So this is a technical draw. I learned of this when I was teaching a low rated a friend of mine who just was new to the game, and then I won the exchange early on, and then I just traded everything down, and then before I realized it was in a similar position like this, and then there really is no way for white to press for a victory. Let's say king to f3, perhaps trying to get your king into a more active position. King to g7, preventing any checks, because you can see the bishop is doing a good job of preventing the rook from entering. So maybe rook to a4, trying to get in this way. But you can play bishop to c5, defending that square, and you can see that there really is no way for any side to advance any further. So this is actually a dead draw. No matter where you move the rook, you can move your bishop to try and cover it. As long as you don't lose your bishop to a pin or a double attack or a discovery or anything like that, there's no way for any side, for either side, to actually advance. So this is a dead draw. But instead, the more natural king to f7 was played, trying to defend this rook over here, but this is a blunder, because after rook takes, king takes, there is actually no real way to stop this pawn from queening over here. And you can see that this is a real problem. After queen to f4 check, king to e7, and now the queen is able to infiltrate with h7. You have to defend against making a new queen. So queen to b1 check, king moves g2, just getting out of check, and queen to a1. So defending against preventing a queening, protecting a queening square from a1. But this doesn't work because of queen to c7 check, infiltrating, not because of winning the bishop, but because after you move the king anywhere. For example, maybe king to f8, you can now check again on the 8th rank, and now you will be able to queen. So maybe king to e7 first, but no, that's not e7. King to f7. Yeah, if you move your king over here, then you obstruct the vision from the queen, and then you can just queen, and this is a mate in two after this, and here this is checkmate. So you can't do that. And if you move your king elsewhere, like maybe here, you can even check first, push the king away even further, and then only make a queen, and then you are forced to give up your queen, and this is completely winning for white. So instead, king to f6 was played, which directly obstructs the vision of the queen from protecting the queening square. So of course, white queens. King to g5, you have to get out of check, and then you lose your queen. And black is sort of in desperation mode. It's just playing random moves to delay mate. But white doesn't even have to recapture the dark square bishop, because this is a very simple mate in 3. With two queens on the board, it's very easy to checkmate the king. So after queen a to e5 check, king to h6, and then queen c to g7 is checkmate. So it was in this position that white won with checkmate with two queens on the board. But this was definitely not an easy game for white. This was a very close game. There were mistakes in the opening. Maybe black misunderstood some of the ideas and principles of the opening, which allowed white to get a large center and a large space advantage, and in the opening. But throughout the middle game, some mistakes from white, and then eventually black had the opportunity to pile up a lot of pressure onto the king side, and then by messing up the move order a little bit, there was this h6 move, and then incredible draw opportunity, and this h7 threat that just made the whole thing very close. So this was a very impressive game from both of them, and I think that is all from this video. I think, and that's all for this game and this match. So the match ended with Meridian winning 3-0. So whether or not there can be someone who sort of, I guess, upstages Meridian, we'll have to see in the next tournament coming around December, and see if any new challenger can rise to try and defeat DootchMann. So that's all for this video, and then stay tuned to the next analysis for the group stages of the Atlantean Chess Tournament this Saturday or Sunday if you are, Saturday or Friday if you are in the West, Saturday if you're in the East, and yeah, thanks for watching.